Media consumption. Have we reached a plateau for internet, social media, and smart devices? Perhaps. I was again reading the news this morning, and there was news about this new study. 25,000 participants, 25,000 participants, 25 countries, and yes, there is screen fatigue. It's a thing, and it's really taking a strong hold. Just a reminder, Canadians spend about 5.5 hours per day on the internet via their smartphones, computers, tablets, whatnot, so that's all devices included. So as a result, the concerns are rising around screen time, around media consumption in general, both from the consumer part and from the people who actually make the devices that we're always on. So we've seen different applications that track the time that we spend on devices. Now you've perhaps viewed some of them: Moment, Quality Time, Checky. So they're really trying to help us make better use of our time, right? And what we've seen last year as well is that the big players are also adapting their latest versions to kind of get on board with this. So Apple's iOS 12 took the lead with screen time utility, so that calculates the number of minutes spent on each app. We also had Google, who followed suit with their digital well-being dashboard in their latest Android 9.0 Pie update. So those are just some of the examples that the companies are concerned as much as the consumers with the way that we spend our time online. So there's a collective awareness, there's an identification of a tipping point, really, of that screen fatigue tipping point regarding this whole overuse of digital devices. And so both creators and distributors of content are kind of trying to help out the consumers make better use of their time. Otherwise, they're not going to come back, right? So it's an important point. Chapter 3 is evolving business models. So 2018 was a tough year for trust, right? You went through it just like I did. So you remember March 2018, The Guardian, The New York Times revealed that huge personal data breach on Facebook that was where our data was used, collected in this massive electoral profiling campaign in the 2016 presidential election in the States. Then just a few months later, it was revealed that Facebook had shared clients' data with Apple, Samsung, dozens of companies. And then September of last year, we had all those cyber attacks as well. So, in September, Facebook's cyber attack with the 29 million accounts data that was revealed happened. But also that year, you must have heard of Google, YouTube, Yahoo, Grindr, and then more recently WhatsApp, Twitter. All these companies were the subject of controversies pertaining to user data. So obviously, in the midst of all these scandals, concerns around personal data protection take on a renewed importance. And the funny thing is, we react very strongly when we hear about all those scandals. Oh, that's terrible. How can they do that without telling us? All these big companies are using our data. But paradoxically, we don't do much about it. Over 85% of Canadians are still Facebook users, and that is despite the trust in the company plummeting. 28% of Canadians are trusting Facebook when you ask them the question. That is Q1 2019. It was 34% in Q3 2018. So it keeps going down and down and down, but we don't leave it. There is this professor from Columbia University, his name is Tim Wu. He calls this the tyranny of convenience. It is so convenient to stay, I'm taking Facebook for an example, but it's just an example. It's so convenient to stay on those platforms that all those data breaches and all those scandals really don't take us away from these platforms. It does, however, create awareness in consumers. So there's an opportunity there for consumer-facing businesses. So ensuring that the data is treated responsibly and safely has become a competitive advantage. It used to be nice if companies and platforms took care of their users' data. Now it's become an essential part of their business and actually a competitive advantage over other companies. And obviously, that's not exactly new, right? Microsoft France, back in 2015, already affirmed that personal data protection was a crucial element of competitive differentiation. The difference between 2015 and now is all this GDPR era, this legislative era that we've entered. So you've heard probably of GDPR back in May of 2018, the EU, European Union, came up with this general data protection regulation that is essentially driving companies to better manage, better protect their clients' personal information. And so that was pretty much aimed at Silicon Valley's giants, right? They were trying to get them to kind of follow the rules, and they caught up really quickly. Facebook put together a team to develop personal data management tools. Google also implemented deletion controls. Apple started requiring that apps housed in its own app store contained personal information privacy policy. So all these things got put into place, and the tech giants responded, right? But there is something that worries the observers with this whole GDPR situation, is that there are reasons to believe that it only benefited a handful of the biggest tech companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, to the detriment of smaller organizations that have less financial, less technological resources to adapt to the rules. It takes a lot to adapt to those new rules. So for instance, in the United States, we have media outlets like the Los Angeles Times, like the Chicago Tribune. So not exactly your anonymous little, media organization. They're a big organization with, some good resources, but they've been forced to block access to their websites by European internet users because they couldn't comply. They couldn't guarantee conformity with GDPR requirements. So that's something to be a little worried about. Now, obviously, the measures that were adopted by the EU have certainly impacted the legislative discourse here in Canada. So in February of last year, there was a standing committee on access to information, privacy and ethics that recommended an amendment to our own PIPEDA, Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. And last month, there's a digital charter actually that was released by Minister Baines as to how that should happen. But there was one key takeaway for now, as the law has not yet been changed. This is a context of legislative uncertainty, and businesses can be assured of two things. Big data is not going away. It's still going to be a factor of success in a digital economy. And also, the counterpart is that we have increasingly savvy, tech-savvy, and data protection savvy consumers. And both of them are going to have to be attuned to issues affecting their right to privacy. And then the last part, markets and competition. Now this is a really interesting chapter as well, because what we saw is that opportunities are rising for content companies in markets that are traditionally less familiar with audiovisual production. So I'm going to be talking specifically about education and out-of-home entertainment sectors. So the education market, as you know, extends well beyond the classroom. You've probably all, went online to hear or to see TED Talks. TED Talks and similar types of content, they achieve over 3 billion views and downloads a year. So that is obviously a huge market. It's also available in podcast formats. YouTube announced in the fall of 2018 an investment of $20 million in YouTube Learning, and there are actually Canadian content creators also that are participating in that project, namely the Canadian duo between the ASAP Science channel. So there really is an extension of the education market, and the other type of education market is that expansion that we can do is the reintroduction of catalog content as a way of developing a collection of learning materials. So we've had a number of different examples come about, like CBC Radio-Canada's Curio, like the National Film Board of Canada's Campus. So they offer a collection of documentaries, films, and whatnot as educational resources. So teaching materials. Ubisoft that as well, when they released an educational version of Assassin's Creed Origins game. Some of you may wonder what's so educational about Assassin's Creed, but there's actually a very strong historical component in that game. And the other type of interesting collaboration that can happen between companies that aren't used to collaborating with content creators is the VR market, but the out-of-home VR market. So we've all seen the evolution or the slow development of VR. Everybody thought 2016 would be the year of VR headsets, right? Everybody was going to get one for Christmas, and that didn't quite happen. Didn't happen in 2017, didn't happen in 2018 either. So people were wondering what's going on with all those high-end VR headsets like Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive. And then we started looking to Asia to see that perhaps the one thing that VR would develop as a market would not be the in-home market, but the out-of-home entertainment market. It is extremely well established in Asia and is also starting to catch on in Canada. So I'm talking about location-based entertainment centers. They're popping up in a wide range of different venues. We're talking movie theaters, we're talking shopping malls, and it's obviously of a very particular interest to the content sector because these companies do benefit from collaborating with content producers, right? Not only to gain access to content, but also to benefit from the technological expertise that we have in our screen industries. And so you may have heard of the Canadian movie theater giant Cineplex that announced last September that it was partnering with VR Studios, and so the agreement would see the opening of 30 to 40 VR attractions in Canadian movie theaters, shopping centers across the country from now until the end of next year. So it's coming to us, and for